Hello, shortcuts. This is the soul and blues video for the price list, which will be published at 9 p.m. on Wednesday, September 20th. This is Shortcuts, an Australian and New Zealand vinyl record club where we share out some of the best vinyl that is possible to find. And I've got some really interesting stuff for this week's Soul and Blues list. All right, let's get started. Now, this is unusual because I have 3 copies of the same record. Albert King's I'll Play the Blues for You, which keen Shortcuts observers will know made its way into my top 5 blues albums of all time recently. And why? Well, it was Albert King's, I think it was his 6th record with Stax. And Stax blues records have this wonderful soul kind of horn section as well as incredible guitar, the 9-minute title track. But why do I have 3 copies? Well, about 4 or 5 months ago, I picked up a compilation called the Stax compilation by the record club, the American record club Vinyl Me Please. And I was blown away with how incredible the sound quality was. It was their 4th anthology. It sold out. It was only 1,000 copies. It sold out in 2019, and finding copies is just impossible. But I was working late, probably 3-4 weeks ago, just trying to get something finished or figuring something out. I can't remember now. And I got a ping from the club saying that they had decided to release a whole bunch of separates from the album. So not the full anthology, but records from the anthology in separates. And it was going to be on sale at 2 a.m. on a Thursday morning. It was like bonkers, really. But I managed to stay up, and I grabbed 6 copies of this record. 3 have already been claimed with various people I know, and I've got 3 left. It is now completely gone. You cannot find copies of this compendium anywhere now. It is soon as the first bass note hits on the opening track, which also happens to be the title track, you'll just be like, all right, I get it. Full AAA from the original tapes. It comes with a listening notes in the form of an artwork dedicated to Albert King. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean it. And it's a really hard album to get. And I've had 4 or 5 copies of it over the years, including a UK first press. This absolutely smashes it into a tin can. It is one of the best sounding blues records I've ever heard. It is magnificent. This is the Vinyl Me Please separate version, not the Stax compilation of Albert King's I'll Play the Blues for You. 3 copies. It's really, really great. All right, now I've got a whole bunch of different things here. Actually, we've got some funk and jazz here too that I should have mentioned. In fact, I'm going to go straight to some jazz, but not what you might expect. This is Green is Beautiful by Grant Green. It's a Japanese press. I think it's 1981, but I'm not actually sure. You'll see on the Blue Note label. So this was the period that Grant Green kind of came back to the Blue Note label, having not been there for a while, and recorded a couple of records that are full-on funk records. They just are. They're not jazz. Thankfully, 2 copies of this were in the box. One of them went straight onto my shelf immediately. To give you an idea, the opening track, and it is worth playing the opening track, Ain't It Funky Now? a cover of a James Brown song, if I believe. Yeah, James Brown. In fact, the second track on side one is A Day in the Life by the Beatles. And it's really, really, really great. Idris Muhammad on drums, a bunch of really great 70s Blue Note musicians. It's fabulous and pretty unusual. 1971. Green is Beautiful by Grant Green, and that copy is pristine. Now, this record was also released in 1971, and I'm going to show you it in its full glory. This is the hard cardboard gatefold of the Japanese first press of Dr. John's 1971 record, The Sun, the Moon, and Herbs. He actually says those lyrics in the opening track, which is also an amazing track called Black John the Conqueror. And he says the sun, moon, and oibs, and he's oibs in that kind of, New Orleans accent. It's pretty amazing. In fact, the two opening tracks on this record for each side one and side two are pretty stellar. Black John the Conqueror is side one, but Familiar Reality opening, the opening track in side two, is just as good. And it is an amazing sleeve. It really is. So part of the mythology around this record, and part of the reason that it is so sought after, is because of how it came about. So he hadn't been in New Orleans for quite a while. He'd been in London, and he recorded this record in London with a bunch of musicians. And let me tell you a little bit about who some of them are. You may have heard of them. You may have heard of Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger sings backing vocals for Dr. John on several of these tracks. You might have heard of Eric Clapton. He plays slide guitar on some of these tracks, which is really something. Bobby Whitlock from Derek and the Dominoes. Just a little bit of him. And many more. It's like a who's who of London musicians who were available at the time. And as you go through each track, you get Bobby Keys, who plays saxophone on Where You At Mule. The Memphis Horns were in town, so they're on a few of the tracks. Also part of why this record is so mythologized is Dr. John originally intended it to be a triple LP, and it is very loose and jammy. All the songs are kind of 6 minutes plus. Arguably, several of them go on a few minutes more than they really should. But I think that's just part of the shtick, part of what he was aiming for. So the record, they decided that a triple LP of a pretty dark, kind of grimy, bluesy Dr. John wasn't going to fly, so it was condensed into one record. And in many ways, I suspect that's for the better, because whilst each of the kind of 7 tracks are pretty jammy and pretty out there, it's very, very enjoyable. I would go so far. It was also released the year before Gumbo, which is probably his most, and before Desertively Bonnaroo and all the ones who were in his classics. This was kind of in between kind of Gree, that kind of jazzy New Orleans funk, and where he went to with Gumbo, which was, joyful New Orleans, kind of almost funk rock. This straddles between the two, and in a good way. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's wonderful. Highly, highly recommend it, and it's super rare. First time I've ever had it. I'm a big fan though. I've got the 3LP Record Store Day release. I've got the US first press. I've got the Japanese first press. I'm kind of a bit obsessed with this record. I think it's wonderful. This next one's really good in its own way as well. Now, this is Survival of the Fittest by Headhunters. I believe this was 75 or 76. Now, Headhunters, that sounds like you might, if you know your funk, especially your jazz funk, you might think, Headhunters, wasn't that a Herbie Hancock record? And you would be right. And this is a Herbie Hancock band. This was a band that he put together after he recorded Sextant, which is a very kind of out there Herbie Hancock record, kind of experimental and a bit avant-garde. This record is pure, straight down the road, absolutely balls out funk. Now, while I'm doing this, I'm just going to look up something interesting in real time, because this is a record that has been sampled at a quite extraordinary amount of times. 300, if you go to whosampled.com and type in Headhunters, particularly the song God Made Me Funky featuring the Pointer Sisters, you will see that it has been sampled 329 times from luminaries like Nas, DMX. It's pretty incredible. There are about 4 songs that have been kind of like the bedrock. NWA, De La Soul. De La Soul sampled Headhunter, Survival of the Fittest on 3 Feet High and Rising. Beats International. De La Soul sample also, I think they sampled 2 separate tracks on 2 separate bits of it. The Fugees, Eric B. and Rakim. Yeah, this is true kind of crate digging funk masterpiece. Really, really happy to have that in the club. Yeah. Now, it's for something completely different, and why not, right? 2 of my musical heroes are about as far away from Herbie Hancock as you can get. Gene Clark and Graham Parsons. So probably the 2 founding fathers of American country rock that eventually became the Eagles, but we'll not talk about that because I'm not so sure that was a good thing. But prior to that mid-70s kind of, almost like became kind of domestic pop. This genre produced some incredible records, including 2 Graham Parsons solo records, which are as good as any music pretty much ever. But also this band, the Flying Burrito Brothers. This is a hard cardboard Japanese first press on gatefold of the last of maybe the classic lineup of the Flying Burrito Brothers, which featured Chris Hillman. So Chris Hillman was also in the Byrds with Graham Parsons and Gene Clark, and was driving force behind the Flying Burrito Brothers. Now, previous records like Burrito Deluxe actually had Graham Parsons. Graham Parsons doesn't appear in this one, but Chris Hillman pulled together this crack band, including the likes of Al Perkins and Kenny Virts, and they made this record, which was a live record. And it is 1972. And what I quite like on the inside is you kind of get the family tree of the Byrds, which is actually pretty complex. It's a really, really lovely record. I've got all the Byrds and Burrito Brothers, Flying Burrito Brothers, and all the way through Gene Clark's solo records, including, of course, No Other and White Light, all of those. But I really like that record, and I suspect someone out there too will as well. All right, we've got a few more to go. What about this? Love this sleeve. It's kind of like this matte. This is Blues Jam at Chess. Fleetwood Mac. Now, this is the Fleetwood Mac of Peter Green, John McVie, obviously, Dominic Kerwin. But Fleetwood Mac with Otis Spann, Willie Dixon, Shaky Horton, J.T. Brown. Guitar Buddy, which was, if you see that, can you see where it says Guitar Buddy? Well, that was because they weren't allowed to use the fact that Buddy Guy plays on this record because the label forbade them. So this was recorded in a single day in, I think it was 1969, when Fleetwood Mac were touring the US. It's utterly fantastic. That's all I gotta say. If you don't have, it is brilliant. And it led to my favorite blues album of all time. And if you don't know what my favorite blues album of all time is, look down the Shortcuts feed and you will see my top 5 blues albums of all time, and go and have a look at what number 1 is. This next record is in my top 5 soul records of all time, which is also a little bit further down this list. And this is the Japanese press of Live at the Fillmore West by the utterly wonderful King Curtis. Absolute Shortcuts royalty. One of the greatest live albums of all time. Have a look at numerous videos where I talk about this record, including the top 5 soul records of all time, which I recorded just 2 weeks ago. King Curtis, Live at the Fillmore West, is my vote for the best live album of all time. Enough said. All right, now, what about this? Now, I cannot find anywhere on Discogs any mention of this record, which is the Japanese first press of 1968's compilation of the best of the impressions. Now, for those of you who know your stuff, you know how much I love Probe, Pink label. They are just beautifully made records, really high quality vinyl, absolute attention to detail on the press. So this is Curtis Mayfield's The Impressions, and I gotta call out a thank you to Dom, you know who you are, because I didn't know about The Impressions and Curtis Mayfield until you asked me. And now that I know about them, I'm kind of half obsessed. They're so good. I didn't even know that People Get Ready was not a Curtis Mayfield song, but an Impressions song, and an amazing one at that. And there's one other song on here that I've had on repeat. Let me see if I can pick it out of the list here. Was it You Must Believe Me? You Must Believe Me. It's this really slow jam, and it is really cool. Anyway, no Discogs entry for this. Maybe a few of you out there might put it on Discogs if you pick it up, but it's rather fabulous. Best of the Impressions. My old friend. I also spoke about Syl Johnson in my top 5 soul albums of all time. One of his made the top 5. Not this one. This one lounged just outside the top 10. Total Explosion, Syl Johnson. Syl Johnson is utterly wonderful. Stunning voice. Really just absolutely top quality soul music. If you don't know Syl Johnson, go and just put on, I don't know, put on Total Explosion, or Is It Because I'm Black, or something like that, and just chill. All right, 2 Stone Cold classics to come. This record, 1969's Completely Well by B.B. King, his most acclaimed record in many ways, his biggest selling record. It led directly to Indianola, Mississippi Seeds, which is my personal favorite B.B. King record, because this is his first record with Bill Zimick, the famed producer, and they nailed it on the next record. But this is Blues Hall of Fame because The Thrill Is Gone is on this record, and The Thrill Is Gone is arguably his greatest blues song and maybe one of the greatest blues songs of all time. At the time that he made that record, he was in his early 40s, and he'd had 20 or 30 R&B hits, but he had never cracked the pop charts until this record, until The Thrill Is Gone. And what's fabulous is The Thrill Is Gone is the last track, and the record builds to it, but it's brilliant all the way through. Yeah, completely well. B.B. King. Great record. As is this. Now, this is a variation of this record that I've had only very rarely. This is the original Japanese Atlantic green and blue release of Otis Redding's The Dock of the Bay. One of the most famous posthumous albums of all time. And in fact, inside you can see the lyrics and the sleeves. This was kind of before the Japanese hit on the idea of having the lyrics and sheets separate. They actually embedded them into the records up until probably, around about this time, 1968. After that, you start getting the inserts. But up until that point, it was pretty obvious when you had a Japanese press because everything on the inside was Japanese. So there you go. The Dock of the Bay, Otis Redding, cut down in his prime in this record, pulled together his key singles and B-sides and some other things from about 65 through to 68 and became a classic. Right, well, there you have it. That's the soul, blues, funk, and country rock, as it turns out, that I forgot list. This is list one. List two will focus on a couple of other things. I'll give you a sneak preview. Here's the kickoff record. Rush. Exit stage left. That's list two. Thank you all if you've made it all this far. Please subscribe if you like the video. If you would like to be part of the mailing list with the pricing list that comes out at 9 p.m. on Wednesday, hit me up. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully something caught your eye. Please leave a comment, like, all that stuff. Apparently it works. And I will talk to you again very soon with video 2. Thanks, everyone.